we're in a position now where change is the economic pressures and the political pressures of finding a supply chain alternative is going to get less and less to the place where in the future, I can easily see 10 years from now, we're right back to the same place we were pre-COVID, where 95%, 99% of supply chains touch one country, a place like China or a place like India. India is really looking to become the new China because China is looking to become the new tech hub of the world. So we're going to just fucking repeat history all over again.
Yeah.
And that's because it makes sense globally. It makes sense logistically. It makes sense socially. Because imagine a Kamala Harris presidency where she then targets human rights abuses in countries that are supplying American businesses. So that American businesses now get either taxed or fined or penalized if they have a logistics supply chain that goes through Bangladesh. Now those countries are going to be like, well, shit, where can I go that is okay? Oh, India. Sweet. Here we go.
Bustamante 2024. Do that, slave labor. You do that shit. You understand me?
I'm just saying, like, we always choose what to put our myopic focus on politically. Like, we're going to focus on this. We're going to focus on that. And we forget that there's a whole chessboard in front of us.
One of the most important things you ever ingrained in my head just is like how to look at things. And it's extremely obvious, but when you realize it. But you said, I think it was in episode 97, the first one we ever did together, you're like, the only fucking thing that matters when you're looking at world powers and where their chess pieces are on the board is their GDP.
Yep.
Right? So who has the biggest GDP? We still do right now, but that gap's shrinking. And you know, you keep talking about these different alliances that are forming, be it, you know, the BRICS on one hand, be it, you know, countries that where it's East versus West, and you have all these weird Eastern alliances between 2 or 3 different continents. And it's like, at what point do we got to get worried about the US dollar ceasing to be the reserve currency, which, just doing very basic math in my head, would effectively mean the end of the United States as the leader in GDP in the world?
It's a great question. So fact-based finance and economics, it's a long time away. Okay. The idea that the US dollar would decline so much that it's no longer the reserve currency, you're talking about decades, if ever.
Okay, that's good.
However, it's worth noting that the decline in the power and value of the US dollar as a reserve currency has been increasing exponentially for the last 5 years. So the world is diversifying away from the dollar. More trade than ever before is being done outside of the US dollar. Countries that have always traditionally used the US dollar are using less US dollars. So even though the decline can be counted in percentages, like 1.3%, 2.3%, the increase in that decline is exponential, because 5 years ago, it was like 0.02% of trade that would change out of the US dollar. So we're declining at a rate 10 times what we saw 2 years or 5 years ago. And if that trend continues, then 15, 30 years from now, we'll start seeing, you know, US dollar valuations and US dollar trade drop 15%, 20% in a year. And that's fast. That decline, though, is largely tied to 2 things. One, the US dollar is stable, reliable, and insured by the United States. So there's still a lot of value in the US dollar that just simply doesn't exist in something like the Chinese renminbi or the Russian ruble. Because we've watched as those governments have completely changed the valuation of their currency just on a whim. US dollar doesn't really do that. It's pegged to more stable things than foreign currencies. So when you're a developing country, just imagine if you had $200 and you wanted to, you needed that $200 just to survive week to week, you're not going to invest it. You're not going to take $150 and put it in some penny stock and hope that penny stock explodes, right? You're going to probably keep it in your mattress, someplace really, really stable. It's not until you have like $100,000 that you'll take $500 and throw it into a penny stock and see if it explodes. So most of the developing world wants stability. So they keep trading in the US dollar. But the wealthiest countries out there, especially the wealthy countries that don't like the United States, those are the countries that are the fastest to dissociate themselves from the U.S. dollar, especially now that the United States has set a precedent that if you hold U.S. dollars in U.S. banks, we're just going to take them from you if we don't like you.
Yeah, that's not a good precedent.
Not if you're trying to maintain the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency of the world.
And that's where you're just thinking way too short term because you're worried, you're pissed, maybe with fairness about a geopolitical conflict, but you're not thinking about the precedent you're setting doing that. That's a problem.
Yeah, and then the other thing to keep in mind is that when we talk, GDP is the basic poor man's gauge of power. You have more GDP, you went up in power. You have less GDP, you went down in power. The other thing that's just like a nut hair away from GDP is something called PPP, or the purchase power parity, which tells you how much value you can get for your purchase power from the currency you hold. And in terms of purchase...
In English. In English.
So if I had a rock, if I had a red rock here and a blue rock here, they're both rocks. They both weigh the same amount. They're both made of the same material. When I give you my red rock, I get a cup of coffee. When I give you my blue rock, I get a cup of coffee and a piece of toast. Which one's more valuable? Even though they're exactly the same. That's what PPP, or purchase price parity, is. It means that with my rock, I can only get a cup of coffee. But with your rock, you can get coffee and a piece of toast. So now if we're comparing our currency against foreign currencies, in the United States, our rock gets us expensive groceries, expensive fuel, and we don't get much for our dollar. But in Russia, your ruble gets you less expensive groceries, a full tank of gas, and an extra cup of coffee. That means the purchase price parity of the ruble is higher than the purchase power parity of the dollar. Make sense?
Yes.
So what we have already seen change in the world is that for the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and more, their purchase power, their triple P, is higher than our triple P. So our GDP might be higher, but what they get for their currency is higher. That is the beginning of a tipping point where if I get more for a ruble, I want more ruples. So then the more people buy ruples, less people buy dollars, right? As less people buy dollars, what we hope will happen is that there will be a increased demand for the decreased supply of dollars, except that the Biden administration printed all this new money, which then threw a bunch of new dollars into the marketplace, which adds supply, which decreases demand and decreases the value.